Bibles are open. We're going to be in Esther today, chapter 2, Old Testament book of Esther. You know, when I prayed through this and talked with our other pastors on staff, hey, we're going to go through Esther, I thought this will be so good, so easy. Yeah, this is a challenge. But we're in Esther chapter 2 today, and I'm going to be reading the first 4 verses. We're going to cover the whole chapter, but we're going to look at the first 4 verses as we begin. So follow along, if you will. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Vashti, of course, was his queen, his wife. She offended him. Verse 2. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of the kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so. This is the word of God. Thanks be to God. It's an interesting account here. I'm going to read a quote to you, see if you know where this is from. Some of you may. "My protege, as you call him, is a sensible man, and sense will always have attractions for me." Anybody have an idea of what book, that novel that is from, what author? Well, you know me. You know I curl up every night reading a little Jane Austen. So that is from Pride and Prejudice. That's what that's from. Now, I just was testing you. It's Sense and Sensibility. I was just making sure, She probably wrote more than one book. So there it is. Sense and Sensibility. I love the look. The people that have my notes are going, that's not right. That's not what it is. Sense and Sensibility. It is a highlight from that book, and it highlights how one of her characters, Eleanor Dashwood, embodies reason and pragmatism, or sense, as it said, while the other, Marianne, embodies sensibility. Now, these are fictional characters, and they highlight a difference in what is defined as good judgment and prudent with that which is sympathetic. But we're not here as a book club to study Jane Austen novels. But there are differences highlighted in that understanding of sense and sensibility that do resonate a little bit with what we're looking at today. The differences highlight something similar in this Old Testament narrative account of a young queen, a young girl who would become queen. Now God, as we know, over the last couple of weeks we've mentioned this, is not mentioned by name in the book of Esther. And yet we know this. And we have declared this, we have seen this, as we've even read just through that first chapter, that God is always at work. Now, just understand, silence about God does not eliminate his sovereignty overall. Just so you're aware of that. So when God calls his image bearers to himself, which is what he does for everybody who is a Christian, every Christian in the room, God initiated that drawing of you to himself. When Joe Pierce surrendered his life to Christ, which we saw illustrated in the baptism, it was God who started that. Joe may have thought he started that, but God was at work even before. When I became a Christian many years ago, I would have thought in my childlike faith that it was me who made a decision to follow Jesus. But as I grew older and began to understand what the Word said, I realized that God was at work before I knew him, and was setting up some things so that I would be drawn to him by his Spirit. So it is God who draws people to himself. He draws us to himself for salvation, and he draws us to himself for service. No Christian is called and saved so that they can just sit for the remainder of their earthly life. We know that. God has called us to service, to be doers of the word. And yet we also recognize that calling is rarely just some one-time call. I mean, that kind of one-time immediate, it's kind of fearful if what if I miss this call? It's kind of that, right? God is continually working. Clarity of call often comes with time and reflection and maturity, and a retrospection also often reveals things we could not or would not recognize at the time. I get opportunities at times to speak with people and to share the gospel, and I find myself in different places, whether in organizations in the community or in the schools, or even I was at a prayer breakfast for a politician who had been elected at one point. I mean, just different things, and I often wonder, why? Why am I even in the room? You ever find yourself in a place and go, how did I get here, and why am I here, and how can I get out? Why am I even here? And then it's amazing, I've noticed this. After time, long enough time, I look at those circumstances and look at those relationships that begin to develop and those conversations that can happen. And suddenly, not by my planning, but I realize that there is a gospel opportunity in the midst of those circumstances. And I'm sure there are more than I actually notice. But the ones I notice, it just makes me think, if I hadn't done this, that, or the other, I wouldn't have been in the room with this person at this moment during this crisis to have this conversation. And that's the same with all of us. God is at work even when we don't see it. God is at work even when, anybody here like to have everything planned out? I mean, my calendar's planned out. But then things interrupt my calendar. Anybody ever have an interruption on your calendar? Right. An accident happens, a funeral takes place, a death in the family, a job circumstance shift in that. I had all these plans, but now I've got to back up. That doesn't mean God's absent. God's heavily involved in all of that. God's involved in the planning even when He does not ask our permission. It's amazing, isn't it? He actually owns the calendar. So as I look at this and I read this story of Esther and this narrative, I start seeing some things taking place here that at this point in time, Esther has no idea why she is being placed in the position she will be placed in that will not be revealed until chapters later. So as we walk with this young lady, we can walk with the naivety of just saying, okay, and she really didn't have a vote. I mean, this is not a choice she had. This was a position she was placed in based on, decisions others had made that had authority and power, and even a queen she had never met. Decisions she made to not be brought before the king's friends in a way that he desired opened the door for circumstances that were not random. Our God is not a random God. God is orderly, God is planned, God is sovereign, even when He doesn't ask our permission for how the schedule should lay out. But that doesn't mean we don't plan. It just means we plan and we trust. In this portion of Esther, this book, we see the woman finally revealed. We're in the whole first chapter, she's not even in it, but here we are, chapter 2. And she is a young woman. She is a beautiful woman. She will be used in ways she could never have fathomed. And as we look at the complete story over time, we will see that she is a woman who is young and beautiful and placed in a position, and then she is maturing and growing wiser and listening to wise counsel, and she is changing, not just in her status within the nation, but in her character and her heart. Ultimately, she is used by God in ways that provide a precursor to something even greater than what happens at the close of this book. So here, I just kind of was penciling these out. I kind of saw this, and we won't touch on all these today. This is just kind of a theme work or a framework for the remainder of the book. I see Esther is a young lady moving from compliant or complicit to convicted. She moves from surviving, just got to survive, to being one instrumental in saving the lives of many. She moves from sense to sensibility. But let's look at the characters and let's look at what's happening in this narrative here. There are some things that are taking place, and the title I gave this first section is just The Pageant. It's like a beauty pageant. In the previous chapter, we have the queen, Vashti, who has been removed. She is no longer the king. She insulted the king by refusing to put the crown on her head and to be paraded around in front of the king's friends and those that he was trying to impress. And she basically just said, I'm not a piece of property. And because of that, at that moment, she said no to the one who was sovereign over the kingdom here on earth. And the king made a rash decision. We spoke of that last Sunday. And that rash decision was encouraged by those around him. So it's no surprise there. And that rash decision encouraged by those that were fueling him. And by the way, as we touched on last week, he was being fueled by bad advice and being fueled by bad alcohol. So that's what was happening at the same time. This guy was making a bad decision, and it led to a dramatic change in his palace. Now time has passed. This isn't the next week, and we get that in the Bible. We flip the page and think it's the next hour, but it's not. There's quite a bit of time that has passed here. Vashti is no longer there. She is gone, and he appears, the king appears to be regretting some things. Now there's a whole lot of commentaries. What is he regretting? Is he regretting that he really loved Vashti, and now he's already made this statement and can't take it back because that was the law of the Medes and the Persians at the time? Is he wishing he could go back, but he can't? Does he miss her? Or is he regretting that he doesn't have a queen in the palace? What is he regretting? Probably a lot of things. But he is regretting some things. This most powerful man proves that and you'll see this, we saw this in chapter 1, we'll see it a little bit here, and we'll see it later in the book, but here's a man who is apparently, by his own admission, by his own palace, the one in Susa that he is now in, the citadel, by the crown that he wears on his head, and the power he has over all these people that he has taken over, in his mind, he is the main character, right? He's king of the world, literally, in his own kingdom. But this guy, as powerful and as strong-willed, and as much as he makes decisions that are about him, please look at me, that kind of guy, he is heavily influenced by all of those around him all the time. I mean, we've already seen it happen once. You're going to see it happen here. You'll see it happen later. And sometimes it's really good that he's being influenced in those cases, but he is influenced by the recommendations of those he calls his friends or his subjects or who have some power. Now, I say influence. Sometimes it looks like he's being not just influenced, but manipulated. Maybe. But this continues to be the theme. In this case, the young men who attend to him are watching him and noticing he's having regrets, and they recommend to him, hey, we got a plan. I got an idea. It's that kind of meeting. He says, why don't we gather dozens of the young, beautiful women from throughout the kingdom? Let's just get them all, and let's bring them here into this and create a harem. And out of the harem, we can have like a pageant, and we can pick your new queen out of that. Now, here's a room full of who? Men. You follow? And they had a great idea. Let's go get all the pretty women. None of them asked the women. Probably would have changed a bit, but the men said, it's a great idea. And Hegai, the king's eunuch, is tasked with preparing these women. So women are brought to the palace in Susa from throughout the kingdom. It's a pretty wide kingdom. So you go from India to modern-day Egypt. So you got that area there, and these ladies are brought into this harem. Now this, we could call this the Miss Persia pageant, perhaps. But this is not a scholarship award. There is no scholarship given. This is not televised. They're not wearing the sash. But if you can kind of imagine, this is kind of our culture. We look at this, here's all these women on stage. They look like this, and they're walking across, their hair flowing, beautiful gowns perhaps, and they introduce themselves. I mean, you can almost picture it, right? You know, you've seen the memes of Miss France. You've seen that? Right? You can just picture the ladies coming up to the microphone, Miss Susa, and then she steps back, and the next one comes up, I'm Miss Persepolis, and I'm Miss Babylon, and all these different areas. But that's not how it took place. We call it a pageant, but it wasn't a pageant. Here's why it wasn't a pageant. None of the ladies signed up for it, and neither did their mamas. Now, I'm not. Maybe some people sign up for pageants. Some of them, their mamas signed them up for pageants. But in this case, this was not a voluntary pageant. There's no one in this beauty contest that grew up going as a child. Like, the little children's pageant thing. None of them were doing this. None of them have the trophies in their room, the little awards, the medals. That is not what's happening here. This is a lot different than that. So really, to call it a pageant may be a bit misleading. As Esther and all the other women, here's the thing. If you're selected to be the queen, congratulations, you are the queen. If you're not selected, congratulations, you're in the harem. You're not going home. That option's out. And he's the king, do what he wants. So the women are chosen or taken. To be in this harem, they had to qualify in 3 ways. There are qualifications. Not every lady was welcome. Not every lady wanted to be in it, and whether they wanted to or not was beside the fact, but many of them, it may have been, one of the commentaries says, it would have been a good option for many of them to here's a better life than we have back home. I can live back home on the outskirts of this little dusty town near India or near Egypt with hardly anything to eat, and we're farming in this. Or I could be brought to the palace in Susa and live in the harem of the king and have all this stuff. Maybe it is a better option. I don't know. I don't think so. But some say maybe. But here's what we notice. They had to qualify in 3 ways. They were selected because they had to be better than Vashti. That was a primary. You got to be better than the one that was out. You got it. The sequel's better than the original. That's what they're looking for. Now, Vashti had crossed a line. She had disobeyed the king. You would say she spoke up. She didn't. She told the eunuch no and was then not brought before the king. And the king said, she has embarrassed me. And then all of his friends who gave him advice said, she's embarrassed all of us. And he said, well, out with her. So the new queen had to know better. The new queen had to know better than to say no. The new queen had to know that if the king said, put your crown on and come on, you'll come on. So there's a sense of, you got to be better than the previous one. You better learn from her mistakes. So they're looking at that. No one should be a person that they perceived would grow up or get older and cross a line. Know your place is what they're looking at. And these women are taken and paraded before the king. They had to be young. Now, make sure we get this. This is not young as in children, but they had to be of childbearing age. They had to be able to have a child. They had to be in that age range, childbearing age. Young ladies. They had to be unmarried. That's encouraging. So at least they're not stealing someone's wife. Might be maybe stealing a girlfriend, but they didn't steal the wife. Still, it's not a very good scenario. Had to be young, of childbearing age. Had to be unmarried. Third one, they had to be really good looking. That's what he says. They got to be good for my eyes. I want to look at her every day and not regret it. And that was it. So you send all these guys out around, and they're collecting these women that fulfill these three elements, and they're saying they got to be smart enough to not be what Vashti did. So this is not really a pageant. It's more like a draft. And so the draft is on. But not for young men, not for military duty, but for beautiful young women for this royal duty of being the queen and being a part of the harem. Now, we look at this, and we should, with our 21st century eyes, and this is appalling. I mean, it's this whole concept of how this works. But I would say it was likely viewed much differently in the time this was written. I'm not saying that it was not good or right. I'm just saying it was viewed differently. For many of these women and their families, I can imagine. The king has selected you. It's like they've won the lottery. The family gets a dowry. They get wow, look at this. And yet it seems so wrong for us today where personal freedom and autonomy is held high. And that's a good thing. But personal freedom and autonomy in our culture is not only held high by many, but idolized by most. And now it's a bad thing. So even today, we know people think about this, we know people who have poured decades into their job that they hate, right? Got to go to work, it's Monday. I hate my job, I hate my boss, I hate what I do for a living. But they don't quit and they can't quit because they're trapped. They want to eat, they want to pay the mortgage, they have insurance, they have kids, they have a family, they got a 401k. They got all this stuff. And so, I like one writer, he said, it may not be as different as that because they're looking at the benefit, even though we hate what we have to do, at least my comfort continues. Perhaps maybe people are not so different today as we were in ancient times. But nevertheless, being in the king's harem may provide material comforts that these ladies never would have experienced otherwise. But being in the harem would come at a cost. Now, the king didn't care. The royal people didn't care. But think about this. This harem was a cruel institution because it deprived women of the companionship of a husband as God would intended for marriage. That's gone. If the king doesn't pick you, you're out of luck. And if the king does pick you, not exactly sure it's romantic. So there's a whole bunch going on right here. But Esther, Hadassah, her real name or Hebrew name, she is selected. She is chosen. She is taken. Now, we've looked at the pageant aspect, and I just because it helps me remember, I'm thinking about the princess concept. Now work with me here. Hallmark and Disney have done this to us. It's just a reality. I'm not mad about it. I'm just saying they've done this to us. You've got the designated Disney princes. You've got Hallmark movies where the princes or the romantic movie or somebody wakes up and all of a sudden they discover, Princess Diaries. Oh, okay, so I'm related to royalty. You get this whole kind of concept. It's the propagation of a version of royalty that is popular, marketable to little girls and women, and I guess men too, and ultimately it's cute and entertaining. It's the romance backdrop of the story told over and over and over again. There's no new stories. It's the story of the commoner who is chosen to be or discovers perhaps that they are actually royalty. There's the castle. There's the servants. There's those dancing mice that make dresses. All that. right? All of that, which is the fairy tale, is embodied in our minds. Theme parks are built around this. People dress up like this. Little girls dress up like this. Weird adults dress up like this. Anyway, it happens. The princess concept. But when you're looking at this, you're looking at the reality of royalty, this selection of a queen is no fairy tale. I don't believe this is a romantic story. And as my wife could tell you, I know romance. I know where to find that word in the dictionary. So that's what I know about it. I'll leave it at that. This is really challenging for us to figure out. It's really hard for us to feel. You know, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard as Westerners. It's hard as Americans. It's hard that when we're saturated with the entertainment industry, which defines a version of royalty and the princess story and the king and the castle and Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, all that. It's really hard for us to get into the reality of what it looks like. And even the version of like the Buckingham Palace English royalty, that's a facade. The reality there is much darker than perhaps we even want to admit. It's just a reality. It's hard. It's hard. Because we read Esther with 21st century Western romance-fueled someday my prince will come lenses. And it's hard to see it differently. But the one who would be queen is now chosen. 12 months of beauty treatment. So they're pretty girls, pretty ladies, pretty young women. They fit the qualifications. But just in case, we're going to spend a full year to make you better looking. Right? This is like a weird reality show. You remember the show, what was it, Extreme Makeover before they did the home edition? There was the other one that was just Extreme Makeover, or The Swan, wouldn't you love to be chosen for one of those reality shows? We're looking for really ugly people. We're going to make you look pretty. Oh, I could do it. You know, so how do you, people that you have real low self-esteem and now you're, you know, and then they do whatever, plastic surgery, dress you up, and now you're 12 months. 12 months. 12 months of beauty treatments, every woman, one by one, would then therefore be presented to the king for his enjoyment, I'll let you understand what that means, and ultimately for his selection as queen. PG-13. Finally, Esther's name is called, and she is selected to see the king. The schedule has come to her after a year of makeup and treatments. Verse 16. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Here she comes, Miss Persia. It's happening. She's selected. She's the winner. She gets the trophy. She gets the crown. She gets the tiara. She is it. She's better than all the rest of them. And the crown that is placed on her head, that's the same crown that the other queen refused to place on her head. So there's all this going on. It's the same crown that Vashti said, I'm not wearing that, to be paraded around like a piece of property. Vashti's older than Esther. Maybe Vashti used to wear the crown, but now she said no more. But now the queen, the new queen, receives the crown. And the king is pleased. Now, I want to take you back. There was a moment as we read through this, it appears that the king was feeling great regret over maybe decisions he made rashly. And so there's some change happening in him as well. I'm not saying he becomes a follower of God. Any stretch of the imagination, he does not. But there's some change going on there. He knew all of the women. He knew all of this woman than what he saw. Here's what he knew about them. He liked what they looked like, and he liked being in their presence. The king was speed dating, but he was the only one playing with all the women, right? They were brought. Do we hit it off? Nope. Next. You're to the harem. Next. And over time, that's how this took place. He was taken in by her beauty, and she, as well as the others who were in the harem, did as she was expected, apparently now seeking to please the king and to be the one selected, which she was. To be chosen was a desire. I mean, think about it this way. If you've already been taken by your family, or taken from your family, you've been brought into the harem of the king, the better option is to be the queen than to be a person in the harem, so it's better to be chosen, better to be selected. And so the queen was selected at this point. No one wants to be turned down. She's chosen. Another feast. By the way, remember the king? He likes eating and he likes feasts and he likes parties. So he's like, you know what we ought to do? We ought to have another party. So he throws another party. And there's a feast now in her honor. And her beauty was to be known throughout the kingdom. But I did mention this is not a fairy tale, right? This is not a Hallmark movie. It's not a Disney movie. It's not a princess story as we have been taught that what they work. This is a totally different story. No fairy tale here, because what we're going to see in the chapters and verses to come is all that God has been doing at a work below the level that Esther, the king, and even Esther's relative were unaware of at this point. So let's look at the position she attained. Not only the position as queen, but a position as influence. If you like letters, there's the pageant, there's the princes, and now there's the position here. So here we are. Esther attains a position of power, of influence, eventually even more, and it's not coincidental. Of all the women in the harem, after a year of those treatments, Esther is chosen. She is the one who finds favor in the eyes of the king. That phrase, finds favor, is similar to the phrase, in fact, the exact phrase that was used to define Daniel and his friends who found favor during their time of enslavement there. But she has found favor in the eyes of the king. She now is not just Hadassah, the Jewish girl. She is, and by the way, he doesn't know she's Jewish. She is now Esther, the queen. She has a title, she has a crown, she has a position of authority, and she has found favor. And yet at this point, it seems that sense has triumphed over sensibility, and the pragmatic sense of this is the best I get, this is okay, this is good. She's not even at a point to recognize the deeper story of what's going on. But we have to get here first. The result of the position was initially happiness. Who wouldn't be happy? You used to be a poor little girl whose parents, she was an orphan. Her parents were dead, and she did not live in wealth. She did not have everything, and suddenly, after a year, she is thrust into the most powerful position for a woman in the kingdom at that time. The result was happiness. She's the queen. She's been chosen. She's been picked. Now, I mean, there's not a person I've never met anybody that didn't like to be chosen. Well, I'm not totally irrelevant to this story, just different. But I mean, I'm thinking third grade recess. We're dividing up into teams for kickball. We're going to pick who's on our team. No one wants to be the one not picked. Everybody wants to be picked. Makes you feel good. You've been chosen. You've been selected. And she's been chosen. She's been selected. She has all of this. But it seems like some more is going on here. So she doesn't recognize the bigger story. And I would say that's probably true for all of us. Most everybody here, especially those of us who maybe been in church our entire life, maybe even became Christians at a young age, didn't recognize what God was doing when he was doing a lot of things. And he has always been doing a lot of things. You've heard the phrase 20/20 hindsight. You can kind of look back as you get older, you get more mature. You know what happens when you get older, you start crying at things you didn't used to cry at. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, maybe that's just me, but you get real sensitive about stuff. And then you start looking back, you get old photographs, or maybe you start looking at old videotapes at 10 o'clock at night and send them to your pastor and said, I remember this video from when, sorry, Tommy, that was really good. I'm 10 o'clock, I'm getting screenshots and videos of the 2000 high school graduation recognition here. I showed it to some of our students. Where is she, Alexa? I showed it to Alexa. I showed it to Abigail because her mom's in one of the videos. And I showed the picture and Alexa goes, who's that guy? And I said, oh, the tall, good-looking guy with dark hair, a full head of hair? That would be me. That's who it is. But it's been 26 years, so there's a bit of a change going on there. But I get it. Nostalgia does that to us. You look back a little bit, you see things different, and you look back and you go, I had no idea what was going on back then in my life, in my family's life, in this church's life. But now I look back, I see where God was at work even then when I didn't recognize it. Here's the good news. You may not recognize it today, but God's at work right now, here, in this place, in your life, and in my life. Well, she didn't recognize it at the time, I'm pretty confident. As we dig deeper in coming weeks, we're going to see some things happen. But let me bring to the front right now, as I come to a close, another probably of the human characters, the second most important character in the book. Now, you would think, well, the king's got to be pretty important. Yeah, I guess so. But I think he may be the third most important. I think the second most important character is this guy named Mordecai. Now, who is Mordecai? Let's go back to verse 5. Same chapter, Esther 2, verse 5. Now, there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, that's the city, Susa, that's where this is all taking place, whose name was Mordecai. Mordecai was the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. Can I just pause and say that whole verse, all of that, all those names and this, that, and the other, I get this because I understand. Those are the kind of verses most of us skip over and go, whatever. Ancient dead people's names in cities I've never been to, what does that matter? I'm going to tell you that right there, all those names, all of that Benjamite stuff, that Nebuchadnezzar stuff, that Babylon stuff, all of that is a huge deal to this story and will be revealed later. So you think it's just like, well, it's just history, I don't care about that. Let's get to the good stuff. That's why there is good stuff, because the details matter. Isn't that amazing? God cares about the details. He cares about your details. He cares about who you are, who your parents were, where you were born, when you were born, why you were born, how you were born. He knows about all this. God still cares about all that. Well, anyway, back to this. Verse 7. Mordecai was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father or mother, so she's an orphan. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. He raised her as a dad. Mordecai, this Jewish man, Mordecai. Isn't that an interesting name? Mordecai. Mordecai is a Jewish man named after a Persian god, Marduk. Interesting. More to that later. He's living in Susa. He's of the tribe of Benjamin, which we'll talk about later, and while other Jews went back to Jerusalem, you remember last year, those of you that were with us this past year, we studied a lot out of Ezra and Nehemiah, and we talked about what was going on in Jerusalem during that time. Well, that is significant because a lot of Jews left the captivity and went back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, rebuild the wall, but apparently Mordecai's family said, we'll stay, because not everybody went back. And Mordecai is part of the remnant that stayed for whatever reason. But he didn't go back to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's not even mentioned in this book. And he's named after a Persian god. So there's some things going on in here in his family. Maybe some compromise by his parents or grandparents even. But he is of this significant tribe. He has raised his cousin Hadassah as a daughter because her parents have died. Hadassah is the Hebrew name of Esther, and Mordecai is a big deal character in this story. See, you think the story is only about the queen, but then you realize there are other people that are valuable and viable and vital to a story. So for everybody who's a Christian in the room today that thinks that God saved you so you could just join a church and become part of a crowd, I want you to recognize this, that no one is called to be just in the crowd. God has something for you. He may not put you on the stage. He may not make you the most known in the kingdom, but he might. But he probably won't. He didn't do that for everybody. But he has a kingdom role for everybody that must be fulfilled. That must be fulfilled. When Esther was taken, Mordecai gave her this instruction when she was taken to be in the harem. He said, do not make it known that you are an Israelite. He then stayed in Susa. You know, all these other ladies are taken from all over, but she already lived close to the area. She was already there. So he stayed close by to do as best he could to keep an eye on her, to ensure she was safe. I don't know what he would have done, but he wanted to make sure she was okay. And he wanted her to know that he was right there. So God put Mordecai in Esther's story for her good. And ultimately, God put Mordecai in Esther's story, even with her parents dying and all the circumstances and everything that no one knew, why is this happening, for the good of God's people. But that is yet unknown to both of them. They still don't know what's going on. There's more to come. It's an incredible story, but as we pause here at this point, the question is asked, what is God doing in your life today? Think about it, just you. What is God doing in my life today? Is God at work? Well, I would say yes, and that's the right answer because we're in church, right? But you may even say yes with your mouth, but in your mind you think, but I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't understand it. I don't see how he's at work. You may be living with a good sense of and a focus on prudence and caution and doing what's best for you and your family, perhaps. And that's normal. Who wouldn't do that, right? Because this is how we function. This is how we get through in life. But at some point, what we want, what we desire, and what we enjoy, mixed with what is safe, causes the least amount of disruption and is comfortable. If we're not careful, that's what drives us or keeps us complacent. See, people choose their jobs based on all of that. What is safe, what is comfortable, what is going to be best for my family. People choose their college or university or where they want to go based on all that. Once they get beyond, I like this team because of the football team, then they look at what do I want to do with the rest of my life, and they pick their college based on the best program, the best thing, all of that, and that's understandable. I get that. As parents, help their kids decide these decisions. Where one lives is often decided by all of those things because that's human nature. But what if all those circumstances just simply didn't happen? What if all those things that seem to, this is the job I got, this is the house I'm living in, this is the school I'm going to, this is the friend group I have, this is the gym I'm going to, this is the club I'm joining. What if all those things that in your mind, I chose all that and it's just maybe coincidental, what if they're not coincidences? What if God in His sovereignty was actually doing some things for His good or your good and His glory and you didn't even notice it? See, I think that's a very real possibility. I think it's a very real possibility. In fact, I think that's what happens. God, who is sovereign, who simply spoke everything into existence, is still deeply concerned about your details of life. What if God really does care about your situation? What if God really does care about your friend group and your friendships? Your romantic endeavors, your career, your life choices? What if He is so deeply involved that all those seemingly individual choices that you make based on how you feel at the moment, I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm sad, it's best for me and my family, what if God has actually got all of that on His radar? What if the position you now find yourself in was not simply the latest step in a long chain of coincidental events, but designed by God for something more? See, that's Esther's story. She had a plan and a process, but then something interrupted her plan, and that was randomly, right, quote unquote, Vashti wouldn't put a crown on. And because Vashti didn't put a crown on, somebody made this statement to the king. King made this decision very quickly. King got really sad really quickly, and then all of a sudden another decision was made by the king's people and the king, and now Esther, random girl, living in Susa, nice to look at, fits the qualifications, is taken. And oh my goodness, suddenly, after a year, is placed in the palace. Not by her choice, not by her decision, not by anything she thought was ever happening, but God orchestrated that. What if the position that you now find yourself in was not simply that latest step? I believe this is true for us. I believe for Christians that God did not save us simply to add you as a member of the crowd or the congregation necessarily. But He has saved you to create you as a chosen son or daughter to be in His family. For what? For His glory, which is also for our good. If you are a Christian, here's a good news story for you this morning. You are royalty, not Hallmark Disney version, but biblical version. You are royalty. You are a child of the King of Kings. You are a co-heir with Jesus Christ. And as Christians, you have been saved, adopted, rescued, and positioned for a story much larger than any you could imagine. Too many people, I heard this many years ago, too many people settle. In their Christianity, they settle. In their lives, they settle. And I heard one pastor say it this way, there's a whole lot of people who are settling to be major characters in small stories that don't matter, when they could be a key character in the one story that matters. That's resonated with me for many years. God has much for you. If you're a child of God, don't settle for your version of comfort when God may be calling you to more. Now, if you're not a Christian, if you've never surrendered your life to Jesus Christ, the good news of the gospel is that you are invited in. The good news for you is, and it is good, that you could know this God that we speak of, that we read of, that we pray to, that we sing about, that we know. But it takes a step of faith, and it takes repentance, and it takes an understanding, and it takes understanding that you're not initiating the decision, but God himself is. So if God is drawing you even now to himself, don't miss it. Don't miss it. As I pray to close this service out, I'll be down front at the close of the service. If you want to talk more about what it means to know Jesus, just come down and see me either at the close or at the end of the service, or me or one of our pastors will be glad to talk to you, one of our deacons, and we'll set up some time to have some conversations. So let's pray together right now. Father, I thank you that all that you do and all that is happening in our lives right now, and I don't understand the details. And I don't like it when the bad things happen. I'm not saying you're even behind all that, but I do believe you're sovereign over all things. You are never absent. You are always at work, even when we don't see it and even when we can't really fathom how that comes to be. I thank you, Father, that the Word of God is true and that you are true. I thank you that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and through him we can be saved and know you. And I thank you that you give us stories like the one of Esther that reminds us of just a regular, everyday person who is transformed into royalty in a matter of verses. But it reminds me that as in my life, and for my brothers and sisters here today, we are regular, everyday image bearers of God who are, those of us who have surrendered to you, have been transformed into royalty in a sense because now we are children of yours, the King. And I thank you for that amazing transformative reality. Now help us, Lord, not to settle. Help us never to settle to be major players in stories that don't matter, that no one cares about, that make no difference for eternity, but to be right in your story in the position you've called us to be, faithful and true, as you have been and always will be. Bless us, I pray, at this time. May we worship you even in this time of decision. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Let's stand together as we sing.